Good morning, y'all. Today we are going to talk about the Cask of Amontillado. Before we start this video lesson, please make sure that you have read the story. A copy of the story is available under the Week 2 module. You can read the story or you can listen to the audio version, or better yet, you can listen to the audio version while you read along. For those of you that have read, let's go ahead and jump right into it. The first thing I want to do is review the elements of a plot. Remember, there are 6 basic elements of a plot: the exposition, where you're introduced to the characters and the setting; the conflict, the issue or problem the characters are faced with; the rising action, all the actions that take place as the characters try to deal with the conflict; the climactic moment, the tensest, most suspenseful moment of the story; the falling action, which happens in response to that climax; and the resolution. Remember that the more modern a story, the less likely there is to be a full, complete resolution. Okay, so let's take a look at this storyboard diagram of the plot. Okay, so you should see this on your screen. Notice that it's sort of broken up into 6 sections: exposition, conflict, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. So in the exposition, we are introduced to the 2 main characters, Montresor and Fortunato. We learn also that it is Carnival season. Carnival, if you're not aware, is kind of like a Mardi Gras, but times 10. So think about all of the kind of debauchery and craziness that goes on during Mardi Gras, and think about that being taken to the extreme. That's Carnival. We learn that Montresor feels as though he has been insulted by Fortunato, but we're never actually told what it was exactly that Fortunato did. So we know that he's been insulted, and we know that he wants to enact revenge, and that is our conflict, our problem. So the rising action is when Montresor meets Fortunato out in the streets partying. Fortunato, whose name means the fortunate one, is dressed in a sort of jester's costume, in a cap and bells and things like that. And Montresor, whose name means he who shows you your fate, is dressed all in black. He meets Fortunato and he says, "Hey, I've got this cask of Amontillado, and I'm not sure if I've been cheated or not." And Fortunato says, "Of course you've been cheated. It's the wrong season for Amontillado. Somebody has obviously taken advantage of you." And Montresor says, "I'm going to find Lucchesi to see if he'll come and taste it for me and tell me if I've been cheated or not." And this is where Montresor starts to play on Fortunato's pride. Fortunato, who is in fact a wine connoisseur and a wine expert, feels insulted by this. Lucchesi is nowhere near as good as me. Obviously, you have no idea what you're talking about. I'm the one who needs to go and taste your wine. So Montresor goes ahead and leads Fortunato down into the catacombs underneath his house. So he brings him home. They walk down into the catacombs. And as they're walking down to the catacombs, you get this description of this dark, damp space with mold on the walls. The catacombs are a place where generations of Montresors have been buried. So this is a time period when caskets weren't used. Bodies were put into these little niches in the wall and left to decompose underground. And so as we're walking down the stairs with these characters, we see these bones in the wall. We also hear Fortunato coughing and wheezing, and more than once Montresor tells him to go back, that his health is too important, that he shouldn't put his health in jeopardy. And Fortunato says, "A cough is nothing. A cough will not kill me." And Montresor says, "True, true." And that brings us to the most climactic moment of the story. So they've reached the bottom of the catacombs, and there's this little sort of niche or hole in the wall. And Montresor tells Fortunato to go through this niche. He says the Amontillato's in there. And while Fortunato's in there, Montresor wraps a chain around his waist and locks him in there. And then, in this sort of falling action, after he's already chained him up, Montresor takes this pile of bricks and mortar that he has left waiting beside this niche and starts to brick up. He starts to brick up, brick by brick, build a wall, walling Fortunato into the catacombs. And throughout the next page or so, Fortunato will at times go silent. At times he will scream for mercy. At other times, he will laugh. And all of these things, all of these reactions, I think add to the overall horror of the story. And then we get to the eventual resolution. We learn that it's been 50 years since this event, that this is Montresor reflecting back into the past, and that he's actually gotten away with it. He's gotten away with the whole thing. And so that I think adds an interesting element to the story. One of the things that's really interesting about this story is the author's use of point of view. So if you noticed, the author uses a lot of I. That's first person point of view. And as I said before, anytime you have a first person narrator, you have to ask yourself, can I trust this person? Can I trust this narrator? Well, Montresor is a crazy murderer. So the answer to that question is no, he's not trustworthy. So if you look at the very first passage, it reads, 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. And this is all we actually know about what it is that Fortunato has done to anger Montresor. So one would think, because this is such a horrible act, that it must have been a horrible thing that Fortunato's done. But again, our narrator is not trustworthy. So it's possible that Fortunato just sort of like made an offhanded joke that embarrassed Montresor, and that's all he did. We do know that Fortunato willingly follows Montresor down into the catacombs. So he doesn't know that he's done anything that would piss Montresor off, right? So whatever it is, it's probably not worth this kind of reaction, and that's important to note here. Another thing that's really interesting to note about this story is the author's use of setting. So we have this interesting juxtaposition. Remember, juxtaposition is the putting together of two things to create a deeper meaning. So we have this interesting juxtaposition of carnival. So everybody's dressed in costume, everybody's partying, everybody's drinking above ground. Below ground, you have these catacombs that are covered in dampness and mold and filled with bones and all these kinds of things. And he puts these two things together, in part trying to, I think, show how there's a connection between these two ideas. The idea of the idea of like sort of the way in which debauchery can lead to these kinds of dangers, right? One of the things that really leads Fortunato to his doom is the fact that he is drunk and easily led. And remember that Poe himself struggled with alcoholism and addiction. And so he may be making an argument by creating these two settings. He may be making an argument about the dangers of this kind of behavior. The other thing that's really interesting about the setting, especially the setting of the catacombs, is the kind of tone it creates. Remember, tone has to do with a feeling or emotion that comes in with and through a text. And as you see this sort of damp moisture, as you see these torches that barely glow, as you see these bones in the wall, it starts to feel very dark, very tense. And as a reader, you may even have started to like feel like this sort of tension even in your chest, like, oh my God, what's going to happen? And so this setting is actually a plot device. It is a way in which to create suspense for the reader. The last thing I want to talk about in regards to this story, in this video anyways, is the characters themselves. So Montresor is dressed all in black, and that's important to note. And his name means he who shows you your fate. And he is meant in the story to represent like the Grim Reaper, death. And in fact, he does provide death to Fortunato. Fortunato obviously means the fortunate one. And the reader is led to believe that he is wealthy, he has a loving family, he has everything he could possibly want. And when he ends up being walled up, bricked up in the catacombs, that is, in fact, an ironic ending.